The setup, when power becomes corruption. The neighborhood had always seemed perfect, tree-lined streets, well-manicured lawns, and a quiet atmosphere that promised a peaceful life for every resident. But beneath that pristine surface, a storm had been brewing for years, one built on control, greed, and the unchecked power of a homeowners association, HOA, led by a woman who had crowned herself queen. 4 years, HOA President Karen Mitchell ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist. She enforced rules selectively, imposed outrageous fines, and made life miserable for anyone who dared to question her authority. But her worst crime? She thrived on making homeowners feel like tenants in their own homes, and I was her latest target. It all started with a bright orange violation notice plastered on my front door, a glaring reminder that, in Karen's eyes, I was a problem. Immediate fine, $500 monthly increase. Violation, excessive vehicles on property. I stared at the notice, my blood boiling. 3 cars, that was all we had. My work truck, my wife's SUV, and the used Honda we had just bought for our daughter's 16th birthday. They were all parked neatly in our own driveway, not blocking the street, not causing any trouble, yet Karen had declared war. From my kitchen window, I saw her, the self-proclaimed HOA dictator, marching down the sidewalk, clutching her pink clipboard and measuring tape like they were royal scepters. She paused in front of my driveway, snapped a few incriminating photos, and smirked. This was her routine, targeting homes she didn't like, bending rules to fit her personal agenda. I took a deep breath. This wasn't just about parking. This was about control. About Karen ensuring that she, and she alone, had the final say in our community. But what she didn't know was that I had been playing the long game. For 5 years, I had been quietly buying up homes in the neighborhood through different LLCs. Every time a house went on the market, I snatched it up. What started as a smart real estate investment had transformed into something much bigger, a strategy. A strategy that, if executed correctly, would end Karen's reign once and for all. A neighborhood held hostage. Karen wasn't just an HOA president. She was a tyrant with selective enforcement tactics. Ask Mrs. Johnson, our elderly neighbor, who was fined for having 2 vibrant roses. Or Mr. Chun, the high school science teacher, who was forced to pay for an illegal rainwater collection barrel, despite it being completely legal. The rules weren't about protecting property values. They were about power, about Karen's need to control who fit into her vision of an ideal community. The worst part? Most people were too afraid to fight back. After all, Karen had connections with local officials. She manipulated board meetings to favor her agenda. And she had the financial backing to drag homeowners into expensive legal battles over the most absurd violations. I had sat in silence for too long. That ended tonight. Karen had called an emergency HOA meeting to discuss problem properties. We all knew what that meant. She was coming after me. What she didn't realize was that I was coming after her too. And this time, the fight wouldn't be on her terms. The calm before the storm. I didn't argue when I saw her taking pictures of my driveway for the 3rd time that week. I didn't fight when she mailed another threatening letter about how my vehicles were ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood. Instead, I smiled, because tonight was the night everything changed. I picked up my phone and sent one message to my lawyer. Prepare the documents. It's time. Then, I turned my attention to the HOA property records spread across my desk. 5 years. 67% ownership. Tonight, Karen would realize the biggest mistake she ever made. She never bothered to check who really owned this neighborhood. The showdown, when the dictator faces the truth. The HOA emergency meeting was held in the community center, a beige, soulless building that Karen used as her personal courtroom. Tonight, she expected to crush another homeowner under the weight of her selective enforcement. But what she didn't know was that this meeting wasn't hers to control anymore. A rigged meeting, Karen's classic move. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back of the room, watching as the usual suspects filed in. Karen's loyal followers, neighbors who either feared her or benefited from her favoritism. She had already set the stage. A professional photographer was present, snapping exaggerated photos of my driveway as Evidence. A PowerPoint presentation was queued up on the projector, likely filled with charts, fake complaints, and dramatic accusations. Karen stood at the podium, tapping her sparkly pink gavel against the wood to silence the murmurs in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this urgent meeting about neighborhood violations that are impacting our property values and community standards. She motioned to the screen. The first slide appeared, a zoomed-in image of my driveway, with red circles drawn around my 3 cars like they were criminal evidence in a high-profile case. The whispers began. I could hear some of the neighbors shifting uncomfortably. As you can see, Karen continued, her voice dripping with faux concern, some homeowners feel that they can ignore the rules that keep our neighborhood beautiful. This excessive vehicle situation is just the beginning. She clicked to the next slide. A bar graph comparing ideal properties, her friends, to violators, people she didn't like. It was laughable. I leaned back, arms crossed, letting her dig her own grave. She thought this was her moment of power. She had no idea what was coming next. The setup, my turn to speak. After 20 minutes of Karen spewing half-truths and nonsense, she finally prepared to call for a vote. We will now vote on increasing HOA fees for homeowners who refuse to comply with vehicle limits, she announced, ignoring the fact that she hadn't allowed any discussion. I stood up slowly, adjusting my tie, and walked toward the front. Point of order, Madam President. Karen's smirk twitched. She knew what that meant, an official challenge. You are not recognized, Mr. Thompson, she snapped, gripping the podium tighter. I smiled, calm and controlled, then pulled out a thick folder. Actually, I have the right to speak. According to HOA Bylaw Section 73, any property owner may raise a point of order before an HOA vote. The room shifted. Neighbors started to pay attention. Some leaned forward, sensing that something was off. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she had no choice but to let me continue. Before we vote on these new fees, I said, pulling out a large property ownership map, I think it's important we discuss the actual ownership of this HOA. The murmurs grew louder. Karen's face lost color. What do you mean? She demanded. I placed the map on the table, spreading it out for the board to see. Over the past 5 years, my real estate investment company has quietly been purchasing homes in this community. As of this afternoon, I pulled out a signed legal document, my voice unwavering. I now own 67% of the properties in this neighborhood. Karen's world crumbles. Karen froze, gripping the podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. The room erupted into gasps and whispers. Wait, what? He owns the majority of the neighborhood? Can he do that? Karen's face turned red, then pale. She was losing control and she knew it. I turned to the board members, my voice calm but firm. Since I am now the majority homeowner, I officially motion to dissolve this current HOA board, effective immediately. Karen's eyes widened in pure panic. You can't do that, she shrieked. That's not allowed. It's... Actually, I interrupted, holding up the bylaw book. It is, and I've had 3 different law firms verify it. I turned to the board. All in favor of dissolving the current HOA leadership and holding new elections? Hands shot up around the room. First, Mrs. Rodriguez, the elderly woman Karen had fined for her roses. Then Mr. Chun, the science teacher she had harassed over a rain barrel. Then Bob Jenkins, the retired firefighter Karen had fined for parking too close to the curb. One by one, dozens of hands went up. Karen was outnumbered. She had lost. Her kingdom was collapsing right before her eyes. The aftermath, the beginning of the end. Karen jumped up, knocking over her precious pink gavel in the process. This isn't over, she shouted, grabbing her designer purse and storming toward the door. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. I smiled. Actually, I said, motioning to the documents spread across the table, I think you'll be hearing from mine first. The room fell silent, because next on the agenda, an investigation into Karen's financial records. I pulled out bank statements, HOA invoices, and a list of missing funds. Before you leave, Karen, I said, my voice calm but deadly, Perhaps you'd like to explain where $50,000 of HOA renovation money disappeared to last summer, because it sure didn't go to the community pool. Karen's face drained of color. She froze, because for the first time ever, she wasn't the one in control. And the worst part? She hadn't even noticed the local news van pulling into the parking lot. The fallout, when the dictator loses everything. The moment Karen saw the news van pull into the parking lot, her entire demeanor shifted. She had walked into this meeting expecting to flex her power, to humiliate me, to solidify her control over the neighborhood. Instead, she had just realized she was finished. The collapse of Karen's kingdom. Karen's smug attitude evaporated, replaced by pure panic. "You set this up?" she hissed at me, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. I didn't need to reply. The truth spoke for itself. A reporter stepped out, microphone in hand, camera crew right behind her. "Mr. Thompson, is it true that you now own the majority of this HOA?" I turned to face the crowd, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "That's correct. And as the majority homeowner, I've motioned to dissolve this corrupt board and call for new elections." The room erupted in cheers and murmurs. Karen tried to speak, but nobody was listening to her anymore. "And," I continued, "before Karen rushes off to consult her lawyer, perhaps she'd like to explain where the $50,000 of missing HOA renovation funds went last year." The reporter's eyes lit up. $50,000. What do you mean? I pulled out printed invoices, each one highlighting suspicious transactions under Karen's leadership. "We have documentation showing that last year, Karen approved a $50,000 budget for community pool renovations. Yet no work was ever completed. The funds were withdrawn, and then vanished." Neighbors started muttering, some gasping. "Wait, my HOA fees paid for that? My son's still waiting for those pool repairs. Where did the money go, Karen?" Karen's face was ghost white, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This is ridiculous," she stammered. "I don't have to stand here and listen to these accusations." She grabbed her purse and tried to leave, but the reporters followed her. "Karen, did you embezzle HOA funds? Are you stepping down as president? Will you cooperate with an audit?" She kept walking, her heels clicking rapidly against the tile floor as she rushed out the door, the cameras still rolling. But it was too late. The entire neighborhood had just watched their dictator crumble in real time. Justice is served. The next morning, the HOA board officially voted Karen out. By lunchtime, the police department announced an audit into mismanaged HOA funds. And by sunset, Karen had deleted all her social media. It was glorious, but it didn't stop there. Karen, in a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, filed a lawsuit against me, claiming I had orchestrated a takeover of the HOA. Her lawsuit lasted exactly 1 day. Why? Because my lawyer walked into court with a mountain of evidence. Videos of Karen selectively enforcing rules against certain homeowners. Emails where she openly mocked elderly residents for being unable to pay fines. Social media posts bragging about how she used HOA money for her own benefit. Bank records proving she funneled thousands of dollars into suspicious projects. The judge dismissed her case immediately and ordered a full forensic audit of the HOA's financial records. That's when we discovered the real horror. The shocking truth Karen's greed exposed. The audit revealed that Karen had been pocketing HOA fees for years. Luxury vacations? HOA paid for them. Designer clothes? HOA paid for them. Her son's private school tuition? You guessed it, HOA paid for it. By the time the investigation was complete, the total amount stolen was over $147,000. Karen was arrested. Yes, arrested. The police came to her house, put her in handcuffs, and dragged her out in front of every single neighbor. It was a poetic moment, watching the woman who had ruled this neighborhood with an iron fist now being escorted to the back of a police cruiser. Karma had arrived, and she didn't like the taste of it. The neighborhood's transformation. With Karen gone, the neighborhood finally flourished. We elected a new HOA board, one that actually cared about the community. We lowered HOA fees and redirected funds to real improvements. The community pool was finally renovated. We removed Karen's ridiculous rules, allowing families to live without fear of fines. And the best part? Within 3 months, property values went up by 15%. Turns out, when people actually enjoy living in their neighborhood, they take better care of it. Karen's last pathetic attempt. Even after losing everything, Karen still tried to play the victim. She sent emails claiming she was forced out by big money interests. She called local newspapers trying to spin the narrative. But it didn't matter, because the truth was out, and no one believed her anymore. She ended up selling her house and moving to another HOA-controlled community, where she immediately got fined for parking violations. Oh, the irony. Final thoughts, the lesson of this battle. This wasn't just about winning against Karen. It was about standing up to abuse of power. For years, she thrived on intimidation. She bullied those who couldn't fight back. She thought she was untouchable. But the moment people united, the moment we exposed her lies, she collapsed like a house of cards. And that's the lesson here. 1. Always document everything. Karen's downfall wasn't just luck. It was evidence. If you're dealing with an unfair HOA, a bad landlord, or workplace injustice, keep records. 2. Know the rules better than they do. Karen tried to use HOA rules to control others. But in the end, those same rules were her undoing. 3. Power is only as strong as the fear it creates. Once Karen lost control of the narrative, she lost everything. She thrived on fear. But the moment people stood up to her, she had nothing left. A message to viewers. If you've ever dealt with HOA nightmares, power-hungry Karens, or corruption, you're not alone. Let this story be a reminder. Justice isn't given. It's taken. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more real-life stories of HOAs, Karens, and ultimate justice. And remember, good neighbors make good communities, not dictators.